Let's go. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Chat with the Archaeologist, presented by the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project. I am once again your host, Chester Levosh, and you might notice that I'm sitting down today. We like to change things up here, and today we are changing things up quite a bit because we are kicking off Season 3, which will be a 6-episode run that will focus on archaeological myths and mysteries. I can't think of a better guest today, a better guest to kick this off than the one that we have today. But before we get into that, of course, we have a couple of announcements. And it's not many announcements, so this should be brief. Of course, tours have wrapped up for the season. This is something that I've sort of given you all a heads up about. And yeah, we're finally wrapping up tours for the end of the season. We do expect to reopen again in spring. Usually this happens in March. Of course, there's always the public health crisis that is still ongoing, and that makes things unpredictable, as you've been able to tell from the last, 2 years now. So I can't promise that things will reopen in March, but we are trying to make sure that we have our ducks in a row for that, all else permitting. Now, you might wonder, why can't you come during the middle of the winter? And we wouldn't want to put your safety at risk, for one. The trails do get rather perilous the moment that they get ice and mud. And remember, you're surrounded by giant basalt boulders, so slips and falls can hurt quite a bit. And we don't want that. That's a liability. It just gets to be miserable conditions when it's cold there. And frankly, there's also the concern about erosion. Now, during most of the year, the ground is usually pretty dry, and so your footsteps aren't going to leave much of an imprint. But during the winter, when you get snow and the mud, what ends up happening is that any footprints start to cut into the trail. And that will very quickly turn the trail into an erosion channel. And as we've seen at other sites around the Southwest, including at Chaco Canyon itself, when trails start to become erosion channels and that goes unchecked, it can compromise the petroglyphs, it can compromise the other features there, including astronomical features, and we want to preserve those for all of you so that they can be there in the future. So this is another one of the concerns that's a reason why we tend to shut down in the winter. We're also in the midst of our annual winter repeal. So if you like the content that we bring to you on this channel here, as well as if you like our mission, our public education programming, our petroglyph recording program, and of course our tours, consider donating to us during this holiday season. If you want to get a little something for that scratch that you're sharing with us, we also have merchandise. So you can find that merchandise on our website. And don't quote me on this, no promises, but I don't think it's quite too late for the Christmas shopping season. So if you're looking for those last-minute holiday gifts, a couple of stocking stuffers, head over to our website, check out our store on there, and you can support the project that way too. Now, today our guest, Ken Feder, I hope I'm saying that right, is going to be helping us answer some questions like, did Native Americans live among pterodactyls? And did they paint the images of one of those prehistoric beasts in Black Dragon Canyon in Utah? If not pterodactyls, did Native Americans interact with travelers from out of space and produce rock art depicting extraterrestrial alien visitors? Have archaeologists discovered evidence of an ancient Jewish presence in New Mexico? Well, stay tuned and find out. These are the questions we'll get to today. All right. I'm here and the mics are live. So, welcome, and I'm just having a little bit there's a
decided after reading it, of course, that I was going to have to come out and get a tour of the place. And maybe this spring, if the pandemic eases down and we get the opportunity to come out to the Southwest, definitely going to take up Chester on his offer to give us a tour, right, Chester?
Yeah, and I just got a notification here that the stream might have cut out for a moment, but we appear to be back live. I just want to check on that really quickly.
All right, so you want me to shut up for a while? Yeah. All right, cool. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about this book today. We'll talk a lot about it. Archaeological Oddities, Field Guide to 40 Claims of Lost Civilizations, Ancient Visitors, and Other Strange Sites in North America. Spoiler alert, those questions that Chester added into that introduction, did Native Americans live on pterodactyls? Were they interacting with space aliens? Was there an ancient Jewish settlement in New Mexico? Spoiler alert, the answer to all those questions is no. That was not what was going on. And I know a lot of folks begin their talks these days with an acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement. Hey, I'm living in northwestern Connecticut, which was the home of the native Algonquian-speaking people. The Tonksys were the biggest local tribe, and I owe my life to the fact that this is a place that where I now live. There's a more important, I think, for my perspective, acknowledgement to make, and that is a lot of the sites that I talk about in Archaeological Oddities are absolutely Native American sites. The rock art, the cliff dwellings, we owe everything to the native people and the genius of the ancient folks, of the ancient and modern people who inhabit Turtle Island, North America. And in many cases, though, the claims of great mysteries or great oddities has been made by folks who want to remove the native element of the ownership of those places, and to impose something else entirely, so that sacred sites to Native Americans become representational art of pterodactyls or of ancient aliens or of Bigfoot or whatever. And so it is my hope that folks who read the book Archaeological Oddities or visit these sites recognize that what you're seeing is best explained and described by the descendants of the people who produced those places and produced that art. Anyway, just a little bit of background on how this all came to be. In 2017, my book, Ancient America, 50 Archaeological Sites to See for Yourself, it's kind of a time travel guide, right? Looking at 50 amazing and incredible native from the publisher. Uh-oh. Yeah, sure. So it's 2016. This book, Ancient America, 50 Archaeological Sites to See for Yourself, a tour guide to 50 of the most important, significant, gobsmacking, mind-blowing sites, native sites in North America, published in 2016. And if you're interested in this book, you get a 30% discount on the Mesa Prieta website, I guess, coming up. Anyway, Rowman Littlefield is a publisher, and they're centered in their headquarters in Colorado. And Leanne Silverman was my editor, amazing editor, fantastic, brilliant woman. And when we kind of were decompressing after we sent this off, it was off to the printers, nothing more to do about it. And so Leanne and I spoke on the phone, and Leanne asked me this embarrassing question. She said, "Oh, Ken, so when's Ancient America 2? 50 more archaeological sites to see for yourself?" Man, I tell you, that's not the question you want to hear when you just spent a couple of years putting together a book and you're exhausted and you just kind of want to chill. But when you're an author and a publisher approaches you with an idea for a book, it's pretty hard to say no. But I didn't know if I could come up with a book better than the one that I already had with 50 additional sites. And one of my claims to fame is the fact that I'm the author of this book, Frauds, Myths, and Mysteries, Science, Pseudoscience, and Archaeology. This is in its 10th edition, Oxford University Press. It's used as a textbook all over the place. It's also a popular, a trade book. And Leanne, of course, knew about this book when she signed me to do Ancient America. And although I really, at that moment when Leanne was talking to me, didn't have a clue what my next project was going to be, my mind immediately went into overdrive. And I said, well, Leanne, you know about my interest in archaeological frauds. And now, of course, you know about my interest in people and encouraging people to visit archaeological sites. What if we were kind of to marry those two ideas and have a book which is like Ancient, in which I would talk to people about visiting sites, places, but that those sites and places would be related to frauds, myths, and mysteries. And again, just off the top of my head, Leanne, I didn't think would really buy that idea. It was quiet on the phone. I thought, she's not going for that. And within a few seconds, she said, Kenny, that sounds like a really cool idea. Write up a proposal for it. And I did, in leaving the company, and her life changed, and had a couple of other editors. But by the time we were done, we came up with this, Archaeological Oddities. That's the cover of the book. You'll notice the thing on the top is a replica of Stonehenge in Maryhill, Washington. Right in the middle on the bottom, that's Newport Tower, supposedly a Viking tower in Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. On the right is, we'll talk a little bit about the bottom right is Sago Canyon in Utah, and on the left, it's, I don't remember the name of the canyon, but it's another series of rock art panels that have been interpreted as something other than what Native Americans today tell us these things mean. And basically, the outline of the book is broken down into these categories. Won't go through all of them. Ancient visitors, ancient stone monuments, written messages, villages, extraterrestrial aliens, lost civilizations, and so on. And so the first one I want to talk about here, the first site that you can visit, open to the public, ancient visitors' written messages. And this one is in Ohio, in Newark, Ohio. Now, I'm not sure all of you are aware of the fact that there was a tremendous controversy in the 17th, especially the 18th and 19th centuries, about who had built the spectacular earthworks that are found all throughout the American Midwest. And some of these were burial mounds, and some of them are effigy mounds in the shape of animals. And some of them are platform mounds, literal truncated pyramids on top of which structures had been built. And the controversy was, well, who built them? Native Americans were not capable of building them. So it must have been Vikings, or it must have been Romans, or it must have been the lost tribes of Israel, or whatever. Now, we now know today, of course, these are the product of Native Americans working really hard to produce these very impressive monuments out of earth. But back in the day, back in the 19th century, that was not certain. And there are any one of a number of discoveries, and I'll put those in scare quotes, of objects with writing on them that were purported to show who the mound builders actually had been. It's always some old world group. And among the most probably the most famous ones are the Newark Holy Stones. And these are objects that were found in Ohio, in the vicinity of Native American mounds, and these bore Hebrew writing on them. This is called the Keystone, found in June 1860. And if you recognize Hebrew, you'll see that those, in fact, are Hebrew letters written across that face of it. There are 4 faces of this object, this artifact, and they are each inscribed with a different Hebrew inscription. Holy of Holies, King of the Earth, Law of God, the Word of God. Now, when the gentleman found these things, found this object, he of course brought it. He didn't read Hebrew, so he brought it to an Episcopalian minister who, in fact, did read Hebrew, who translated it. That Episcopalian minister said, the problem with this artifact being associated with the mounds is it's too recent. The form of Hebrew found on this object is modern Hebrew. We're talking about maybe 16th century, 17th century AD. The mounds we know are much older than that. So this must be a modern object. Whether it was a fraud or not had not yet been determined, but the feeling was this could not be related to the mounds. Several weeks later, and a few miles away, the same researcher, the same archaeologist, found another object. And this one, called the Decalong Stone, very different, with another version of Hebrew on it. And this, in fact, was a more appropriate version of Hebrew for the period of when the mounds were being built. And that actually is a kind of a shortened version of the Ten Commandments, and the figure in the middle is supposed to be Moses. So again, here, what people are interpreting this to mean is that an ancient group of Hebrews came to the New World, built the mounds of Ohio, and left behind these, at least this object, with Hebrew writing on it. It was more than a little bit too coincidental that this was found soon after the other one had been found, which clearly had been fabricated, or was at least very recent. And ultimately, in the analysis of these objects, they turn out to be, of course, fake. They were modern plants used to convince people, to try to convince people, that the mounds had been built by ancient Jews, by ancient Hebrews. Now, in a story that can only happen to me, I have been invited a couple of times out to give lectures in various places. And in one of the venues I went to was in Ohio. And at the end of the lecture, they presented me with a replica of one of the Newark holy stones. That's the first one I showed you. So I have this. This was ceramic, and it was given to me it was kind of a gag gift. I thought, oh, this is fantastic. Now, I had flown out there overnight. I didn't have a lot of luggage. It was just a one-night thing. So I only had carry-on. And it didn't occur to me that I was going to be carrying this rather odd-looking object in my carry-on luggage. It was all bundled up with the bubble wrap. So anyway, I'm in Dayton, Ohio, in the airport in Dayton. My carry-on goes on the conveyor belt for security, and sure enough, the belt stops. Security stops letting people in that lane. They call me over, and the gentleman asks, "Sir, may I open your carry-on?" And I say, "Sure." And then my mind starts racing. It's got to be the replica of the Newark Holy Stone that's gotten me pulled off of this security line. And sure enough, it was. He opened my luggage. He found the object wrapped in bubble wrap. He said, "Sir, may I open this up?" I said, "Sure." He opens it up. That's what he sees. And he asks me to please explain what in the world I have in my carry-on. Well, I figured, I might as well tell him the story. So it's kind of a funny story. I'm an archaeologist interested in archaeological frauds, and what you're holding in your hand is a ceramic replica of an archaeological fraud from Ohio found in 1860. Well, the entire TSA Corps surrounds me to hear the story. And I gave them my 5-minute lecture on the Newark Holy Stones. One young woman, TSA agent, asked if she could take notes so she gets the story right when she tells her family. And she took out a little spiral-bound notebook and starts taking notes. So I'm giving my professor lecture to the TSA agents in Dayton, Ohio, and all of the people wanting to get in the airport are wanting to get into to where the planes are, surrounded me, and are all listening to me give my university lecture about the Newark Holy Stones. Everybody, it was really enjoyable, actually. It was weird, but enjoyable. They wrapped it back up, sent me on my way. And one of the other TSA agents ran me down and said, "Sir, this is Dayton, Ohio. Nothing of interest ever happens in the airport. Thank you for the most interesting thing that's happened during my watch as a TSA agent in Dayton." That can only happen to me. But it's my personal anecdote for my connection to the Newark Holy Stones. These are on display in Coshocton, Ohio, at the Johnson Hummercast Museum, and they've been studied for years and years and years. We now have a really good idea of who concocted this, how they did it, what materials they used, and it's all part of a very common thing that was going on in the 19th century in an effort to show that maybe the mounds had been built by somebody other than Native Americans. Ancient visitors' villages. This is another one here on the East Coast. 3 hours drive from me is a site, tourist site called America's Stonehenge. Now, America's Stonehenge used to be called Mystery Hill, and before that it was Patty's Caves. Now, it is in fact a really interesting site, interesting. North Salem, New Hampshire. The most probably famous artifact found at this site, feature found at this site. Well, the people who run the site have a very clear idea what they think it is, because they've got a sign up. They think it's a sacrificial table where human sacrifice was performed, and they even have the sign. The table itself looks like this. And people who are unfamiliar with 19th century farm technology in New England might be confused by this. The table's about 6.5 feet or thereabouts from their bottom to top. Across, it's maybe about 5 feet at its widest. And you see there's a channel that's been carved along that surface. And so the theory is human beings are laid on that table. Their throats were slit, the blood accumulated in these channels, and you notice in the lower right there's an exit channel, and that the blood would be collected for some heathen, horrible, terrible, some blood sacrifice. Well, yeah, that's a great story, except that's almost certainly not what this object is. One of the things that I've told my students is that we suffer from a kind of cultural amnesia, so that if there's an object that's 200 years ago, a 5-year-old could tell you what it is. We can't, because it's not part of our cultural heritage, our immediate culture. In fact, the object at America's Stonehenge, we have objects like this found all throughout New England. This one's in the Hadley Farm Museum, about the same size, different raw material. Again, flat stone, big enough for a person, with a channel. This one has 2 exits. I actually photographed, that's my now 35-year-old son when he was 4 years old, when we visited the site. That's Josh, and I asked Josh, it's great to have kids when you're an archaeologist because you can use them for scale. I told Josh, as I gave him the most blood-curdling version of the story of human sacrifice that I could. And then I asked Josh, I said, Josh, it'll be funny. If you could lie down on that, I'll take your picture. Josh is a pretty bright kid. Josh looked at me and he said, I'd rather not. So I just had him stand next to it for scale. Here's another one, another example. These things are not rare. These things are not mysterious. These things are not bizarre or supernatural. This one is at Old Sturbridge Village, which is a reconstruction of an 18th century village. This is in Massachusetts. Again, a little different raw material, the channel's deeper. But these are all part of a historical industry, and that's apple cider making. These are called cider press bedstones, and you can still see them in operation at old cider mills that are now museums. And in fact, I'm familiar with one of those in England, in fact. And this is the Cider Museum in Hereford, England, where you're looking at a cider press bedstone. It's part of a cider press. It squishes down on the burlap. The mashed apples are in the burlap, and that squeezes all the juice out. The juice flows through that exit channel and into this, in this case, this large stone container. And then most of that cider is going for hard cider. It's a way to preserve it through the winter, is let it become alcohol. This is from that same museum. Really good view of the cider press bedstone in the foreground. The background is a horse-drawn mill in which the apples are being crushed. The apples are then put in the burlap, and it's all squeezed through. This has nothing to do with human sacrifice. It has everything to do with cider preparation, cider manufacturing in New England in the 19th century. Here are examples. So the Mystery Hill, America Stonehenge example is on the upper left, Hadley Museum upper right, Sturbridge lower left. At the lower right is a wooden version of the same kind of artifact. It's a cider press bed, this one out of wood with a channel and an exit on the left for collecting the cider. And that actually at Sturbridge, that is attached to the actual press that was used to squeeze all the juice out of the apples. So, you know, the old saying, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Well, when you see a stone with a channel in it, think apple cider, not human sacrifice. Now, the interesting thing, the funny thing is, the whole business of the human sacrifice by the Druids is probably fake news anyway. 19th century, that was a big romantic view of the ancient Druids of Europe, is that they were all about human sacrifice. This is I love this. I want one of these for like my office, a big print of it. And this is a Druid priest with a human sacrifice victim on the stone with the blood being collected in a chalice. You see human remains under that table of the previous human sacrifices, and then local folks all watching the sacrifice take place. The odds are that whoever decided that stone at American Stonehenge was a sacrificial table probably were informed by these 19th century stories of human sacrifice by the Druids. This is another image of that stone, and here's where it gets incredibly weird. A couple of years ago, vandals attacked this stone because they took it literally that human sacrifices were still being performed on that stone. And I don't want to get into a huge detail on this, but in fact, QAnon people claimed that this stone was being used for sacrificing children, which is absolutely nuts. It's insane. That WWG1, WGA that's carved into the bottom of that is a typical QAnon thing. Where we go as one, we go all together. People were arrested. There's been restitution. I'm not sure where it's going, but it was such a bizarre case in which an artifact that's been misinterpreted by some people, but is nevertheless a really interesting artifact, has been vandalized by people who took it literally that this was being used for human sacrifice. Very, very strange. That's not in the book because this actually happened after the book was written. All right, I'm going to move out to your neck of the woods, to the American Southwest, and talk about extraterrestrial visitors. This is at a site that I think is just amazing. But before we talk about Sago Canyon, let's talk about, we can't leave out Roswell. We're talking about New Mexico. I've been there, the UFO Museum, International UFO Museum and Research Center. I don't know if y'all have been there. It's a fun place. It's kind of a hoot, actually. This is their reconstruction. They obviously they haven't spent a whole lot of money on displays, but this is, I guess, a representation of the spacecraft that crashed in Roswell, and those are some of the aliens. I'm going to reveal something to you now for the first time in public. I was on that spacecraft. You can see me there, kind of walking around aimlessly. Yeah. But anyway, the reason I bring this up at all, the reason I'm showing you this at all, in the museum, there, at least when I was there, there's a display of Native American rock art. And the claim is that rock art is representational. That is, it's an actual representation of aliens walking among the Native Americans of Utah, at least. And I recognize this photograph because I've been there. It's a really very, very cool place. Sago Canyon, easily accessible. And I don't know, I don't have scale there because I'm not going to climb up anywhere near that art, but the individual, those are anthropomorphs. This is Barrier Canyon style, kind of really typical, elongated bodies, no arms, no legs, large eyes, sometimes with what appear to be antennae coming out of the tops. Those individual anthropomorphs or human-like forms are 5 or 6 feet from the bottom to top. So they are very large and very imposing. There's a closer shot of it. And so what the folks in the Roswell Museum are saying, and what other people have suggested, is that these are in fact not spirit beings, which is what Native people say. They are not they're not sacred. They are eyewitness depictions by Native Americans of extraterrestrial aliens, which just kind of blows my mind. How is that a rational explanation here, especially when Native people recognize some of the symbols here? There are snakes floating around. There are these spirit beings that we find throughout the American Southwest in various contexts. So these pictographs, they certainly are amazing, but they also certainly don't depict aliens. And I was talking to Chester beforehand, is that we accept among modern artists creativity, imagination, artistic brilliance. And you look at somebody like Salvador Dali. Nobody ever looks at a Dali painting and says, wow, Salvador Dali once visited the places where clocks melt. No, we know that he had a brilliant mind. Whatever you think of his art, certainly was brilliant and creative and imaginative. Look at Magritte with these guys floating and apples floating in front of them. Did he actually visit a place where that was reality? Of course not. We say, no, the guy's brilliant, strange mind, creative. I think it behooves us to ascribe that same level of creativity and ingenuity and brilliance to the Native people who produced work like this. This is the equivalent of that. This is brilliant stuff, part of their view of the sacred, and that honors them by us, somebody like me who's not a Native person, who honors the beauty and the creativity that's reflected in this art, and not trying to impose from the outside some strange a claim that this is a representational art. It's actual depiction of extraterrestrial aliens. Hey, if there's a spaceship, if there's ruins of a spaceship excavated from this site, now we're talking. But this is just an imposition of some external reality. Biblical proof is through, yes, of course, the stories in the Old Testament especially don't happen in North America, but there are folks who see, who interpret certain sites in North America as reflecting elements of proof of a literal interpretation of the Bible, that is a young earth. And that's another amazing piece of rock art. Now, what I'm showing you here, I was born in 1952, grew up in New York, and in 1964 and 1965, I was obsessed by the World's Fair in New York, which was maybe 40 minutes from where I grew up on Long Island, Syosset. So my parents would take me and my sister to the World's Fair every chance we got. And what you're looking at here, obviously not my photographs, these are from a newspaper at the time, moving these large scale dinosaur models up the Hudson River or down the Hudson River to the spot in Flushing, Queens, where the World's Fair was located. You see there's an iguanodon and a brontosaurus, and there's a tyrannosaurus in the back, and there you see a stegosaurus. And I remember, I do have memories as a kid. This was the Sinclair Oil Pavilion, you know, that the dinosaur is their symbol. And I spent a bunch of time because I was absolutely transfixed by dinosaurs. What's really mind-blowing is that after the World's Fair ended and Sinclair took these on the road and showed them, used them as advertising, and then they got rid of them, but they shipped them out to museums and parks, anybody who wanted them. And there actually are a couple of people online who have tracked down the vast majority of these and have photographed them. Some of them are kind of in bad shape, but check out the Stegosaurus right there in the middle. When I was at Dinosaur National Monument, Utah-Colorado border, that's the same Stegosaurus. I think it's been repainted since I had this photograph taken, but it's not just another Stegosaurus, it's the actual one from the World's Fair. Now, the reason I bring this up at all is that there are folks who believe that the world is not 4.5 billion years old, but 6,000 years old, based on their literal interpretation of the Old Testament of the Bible. And they believe, many of them, not all, many of them believe that dinosaurs were in fact walking around when human beings were. and they try to find evidence of contemporaneity of human beings and dinosaurs. There are dinosaur footprints in Texas that are supposed to be side by side with human footprints. Completely false. But the example I'm going to give you here, well, there's Fred Flintstone, which of course is not a documentary, riding a pterodactyl. There's a site in Utah called Black Dragon Canyon where the claim is made that native people living side by side with pterodactyls painted an image of a pterodactyl in that canyon. It is an absolutely beautiful place. San Rafael Swell, this gigantic, ancient, mostly sandstone geological feature that's got kind of spider legs of canyons all throughout. And in those canyons, native people produce rock art. And I got to tell you, not a native person, but walking through those canyons, the echoes, the shadows, there's a real emotional reaction I think that most people have walking through those. And it's not surprising that people in antiquity had an emotional reaction, and what translated that reaction to art. Now, the art panels, you walk through the canyon, the art panels are all visible. No, well, about 2/3 of them are visible in this photograph. On the left are these kind of barrier canyon anthropomorphs. The white, by the way, is not original. That's people have come in and outlined these things. It's a kind of vandalism, even if their hearts are in the right place. Shouldn't be doing that. But these, so on that left are these long elongated bodies. You see there are like 5 of them there. Over to the right, where that arrow is pointing, there is an anthropomorph and some very interesting animal. Again, the white is all modern, but the image that I want to focus on right now is that one, because the interpretation on some websites is that that's a pterodactyl. Now I know it's kind of the pterodactyl from the island of misfit pterodactyls, because that left. I'm gonna boost up the contrast a little bit. So again, this is my photograph. That's not what you would see. The previous photograph is what you'd see if you were there. The white is all, the outline is all modern. But the interpretation here is that you've got a pterodactyl with kind of a funky right wing with humps on it, a really skinny left wing, and 2 feet, and that's its mouth up on top there. And those 2 things sticking out are its beak or its mouth. I've outlined it for you digitally in the photograph. So that is supposed to be a pterodactyl, showing that pterodactyls and human beings lived side by side. So the world is not more than 6,000 years old or 7,000 years old. This is an actual screen grab from a website claiming that the Black Dragon Canyon pterosaur is still soaring. It still is evidence of a pterodactyl. Well, finally, some real deal people showed up at the site with really good photography equipment, but also ways of analyzing the presence of pigment. So that really, the background rock is kind of red and the paint is red, so it's hard to know exactly where does the image end and the background rock begins. And using that technique, and I love this transition is really pretty cool. So that's what people are telling you it looks like. But when you apply modern technology, that's what you're actually looking at. It's not that, it's that. So that the beak is actually a person with arms out. The left wing, meaning the wing to our right, is a horned snake. The body itself is an anthropomorph. And where they get the humps, it's anybody's guess, but there are a couple of bighorn sheep there. And then Jean-Louis Lecaillec is the guy, actually a French archaeologist, who brought the equipment here to actually break down the real image in that rock art. And it's absolutely stunning, but it shows conclusively this is not the evidence you're going to need to prove that there were pterodactyls flying around in Utah when human beings were producing art. Closer to home, and this one, I love this place, and I'll go through it more quickly. Back in the 1860s, a farmer, this guy here, Okay, gotcha. Discovered what he claimed to be a biblical giant, a petrified biblical giant, 12 feet tall, called the Cardiff Giant, put a circus tent over it, because, I mean, he was thinking ahead, right? Love that image of these folks all peering down at the giant. I love teaching because students sometimes see things that I don't see. A young woman in the front row, taking my class in archaeological myths, asked me a very important question. The woman on the left of this slide has got binoculars, opera glasses. She says, what is she looking at? And if you draw a line, yep, she's looking at the fig leaf on the Cardiff Giant. So draw your own conclusions, I guess. In any event, it was a real obvious fake. This is from the World's Fair, 1901, 1902 in Buffalo, New York, where President McKinley was assassinated. Well, that's important, I guess. But what's more important to me is that it's hard to read, but where that red arrow is pointing was the Cardiff Giant exhibit. So it was discovered in 1869. The guys who did the fraud admitted to it, but it was still being brought out for display in the early 20th century, and it still is visible. You can still find it. It's still available at the Farmers Museum in Syracuse, outside of Syracuse. It's in Cooperstown, actually. So go see the Baseball Hall of Fame. Go see the Farmers Museum, and you'll see the Cardiff Giant. It cost, back in the day, it cost like $0.25 to see the Cardiff Giant. It cost me quite a bit more, but it was worth it. And yep, P.T. Barnum, Connecticut's own P.T. Barnum, the circus impresario, actually offered money to buy it. And when they turned him down, good old Barnum, he made his own. So he had a fake of the fake, which I don't know about you, but that really hurts my head to think about it. And I'm going to jump ahead now to follies. Some of these are hurtful. Some of these are just plain foolish. But this one, I think, is just fascinating and kind of fun. And it all begins in California with Cecil B. DeMille. Cecil B. DeMille made 2 versions of the 10 Commandments. One of the first movies I saw as a kid growing up, 1950s, was The 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston. But he had made an earlier version, a silent version in the 1920s. Right? So there's 56. With Charlton Heston as Moses, Yul Brynner as the Pharaoh Ramses, Edward G. Robinson, famous actors playing these biblical roles. 23 is the older version, the silent version of the 10 Commandments, also made by Cecil B. DeMille. When DeMille made this thing, it was the largest budget of any movie ever made. But where was he going to film it? Couldn't film it in Egypt, so he went north, about 3 hours north of Los Angeles. There are dune fields. Now it's right up against the ocean, but again, this is a silent movie, so you can't hear that. As long as you're pointing the camera in the right direction, you can convince your audience here in Egypt. And they built these beautiful movie sets. This is a Sphinx, obviously. Here they are building the gates to the city where the Pharaoh is going to come out. So these are all period photographs, 1920s, of them building ancient Egypt in Guadalupe, Nipomo, dunes in Central California, Southern California. And some of these are absolutely stunning. This is a screen grab from the film, so you can get the scale is absolutely enormous. Now, there's nothing behind there. It's a movie set, so it's all bare wood behind it. But those 2 colossal statues and the gentleman in front there who's announcing the arrival of the Pharaoh, and they're playing horns, really is impressive. This is a studio photograph. So this is a photograph that I obtained of an actual studio shot of the bas-relief here. It really is stunning. When we go back to this one. So now, when Cecil B. DeMille, this was, now it's a state park. Then it was privately owned farmland outside of the dunes. And Cecil B. DeMille rented the dunes for his movie set. And in the contract, we know this because the contract still exists, he promised to tear down the movie set and remove it so that when he was gone, you would never know there had been a movie there. He ran out of money, and he didn't have the money to tear it down. So basically what he did was he had diggers open up trenches, and he kind of pushed the movie set into it and covered it up. But you know, it's sand dunes and the wind is blowing. And of course, stuff started being revealed. In DeMille's autobiography, which I think was published posthumously, he says this, and I'll read it to you because it's wonderful. If 1,000, again, this is DeMille talking. If 1,000 years from now, archaeologists happen to dig beneath the sands of Guadalupe, I hope they will not rush into print with the amazing news that Egyptian civilization, far from being confined to the valley of the Nile, extended all the way to the Pacific coast of North America. The sphinxes they will find were buried when we had finished with them and dismantled our huge set of the gates of Pharaoh City. So even DeMille said, it would be really funny if long from now, if people forgot that I have done this and archaeologists find all these Egyptian objects. Of course, they're made out of plaster of Paris, but whatever. There are a few photographs of local people visiting the movie set in the 1930s. And again, these have, at this point, these kids are on top of the Sphinx, which has only recently been revealed by the wind, because once these plaster of Paris objects are revealed and the wind blows and the sand hits it, they disappeared pretty quickly. Peter Brosnan, love this man. Peter Brosnan was a film student in Los Angeles in the 1980s, and he heard the story of the DeMille set. And he's the guy who came up with the idea of hiring archaeologists to dig up the movie set and filming it as a documentary. It took a long, long time for permits, for funding. He left filmmaking and got into psychology, but always had in his mind the notion that someday somebody should excavate that as kind of a case study in movie archaeology. And sure enough, they did. I've been there. This is what you see on the ground today. All of that's fragments of plaster of Paris and board lumber from the backdrops of those sets. And in fact, archaeologists have revealed the ancient Egyptian city of the late 1920s. And there's a Sphinx right there. And this is real deal archaeology, only again, it's historical archaeology. You can see there in that little inset is one of the Sphinxes, and there I think were 24 of them or 25 of them that lined the route to the gates of the city. These are not the size of the Great Sphinx, but these are real, they really had these. And you see the haunches there in the back. If you look at the photograph of the dig, that is the back of one of those Sphinxes, the rear leg. And there's the face, just absolutely beautiful. And these are things that required an enormous amount of preservation because they were literally, as soon as they came out of the ground, they started to disappear. The Dune Center in Guadalupe, California, got the grant to maintain these things. That's Christine Evans on the right, Amy Higgins on the left, Amy Higgins on the right. These are real deal art conservators who were hired to help conserve these plaster of Paris replicas of the Sphinx. And there's a permanent exhibit there now. And believe it or not, there's a really bad sci-fi movie called The Sands of Oblivion, in which the theme is that archaeologists, and that's, what is his name, Adam Baldwin, is an archaeologist, and his wife played Miranda. If you remember the show Firefly, she's the consort, Miranda Baccarin. They're both archaeologists, and they're hired to dig up the movie set. But of course, in this movie, they release some evil Egyptian demon who somehow has managed to get in California in a fake movie set, and well, hilarity ensues. I'm not sure the movie is available on Netflix or not. Peter Brosnan, however, has a documentary which you can find based on the real excavation of the site, and it's absolutely fascinating. All right, I'm winding down now. Obviously, I've got 40 sites in the book. I only dealt with like 5 maybe of them. And so Sedona, Arizona, and the vortexes, that cross is from that's a lead cross found in New Mexico. That's supposed to be from some ancient Jewish community. The Newport Tower, the Kensington Rune Stone. Lower left is the Los Lunas Decalong Stone, which is supposed to be it's the 10 Commandments found outside of Los Lunas, New Mexico. It's really cool. It's not ancient. There's just no way. The weathering of that shows very clearly. It's, maybe it's 100, 150 years old. The fake Stonehenge, Davenport tablets. So there are lots of sites covered in the book. I think what I'll do now is just that's my summary. Go and see these sites for yourself. Really super interesting. And here's I think that's my last slide, and I'll end screen sharing, and we can talk if you want. That's the cover of the book. So, oh, look, there's I'm trying to, oh, there you go, maybe. So let's go back to Zoom. And here I am. Done. So, are we still here?
Yeah, we're still here.
Okay, good. That's one of the problems with Zoom is, of course, you need people to mute so that you're not hearing all this ambient noise. But then I don't know if any of the jokes are flying, and I don't know if anybody's still there. But I hope that I entertained you all today, and maybe inspired some of you to go see some of these places. And I'm open for questions, whatever you need, whatever you want.
Yeah, deeply entertaining. In fact, I've been to some of these places, like the famous Egyptian ruins of Guadalupe, California.
How cool is it? I mean, it's just so cool. But it's so cool that even Cecil B. DeMille said, wouldn't it be funny if? And that, everybody knew what was there, but still, it's a great story.
So I don't see anything in the chat right now, but we do have two very quick stories to get to. And before we get to those, I wanted to give you a chance for, do you want to plug your books here? We've got a special discount for our audience.
Yes. Whenever I do these lectures and I plug books, I always feel like people are saying, oh my God, that guy is shamelessly plugging his books. And that's not true. I'm very ashamed. No, not really.
This stream, we encourage shamelessly plugging books. The more books, the better.
So the two books that I'm plugging here, well, I'll plug three. Ancient America, 50 Archaeological Sites to see for yourself. Since 2016 now, it's a paperback. It's done real well, and it's my attempt to just encourage people to go and see these places. These places are open to the public. Sometimes national parks, national monuments, state parks, state monuments. There's one that's completely on private land. They're incredibly cool places. You want to see these places for yourself, for sure. Mesa Verde, Cahokia, some of the rock art in New Mexico, Petroglyph National Monument, the Horseshoe Canyon, the rock art there, Sago Canyon, Three Rivers. These are places that it's impossible for me to describe them, and even photographs don't really do them justice. To be there and see this incredible living art, just mind blowing. The Archaeological Oddities is my effort again to merge my interest in archaeological frauds and misinterpretations and just kind of silly stuff with this notion with people as a tour guide, to encourage people. These are places that are open to the public. Go and see them for yourself. Bring your kids. They're really interesting. The locations are beautiful. And if my book helps inspire people to go and visit these sites, then it's all worthwhile. The Frauds book is a little bit more serious, but again, it's me. It's full of interesting stories, funny stories about people's misinterpretation and misuse of the archaeological record. It's, the Piltdown fraud and the Cardiff Giant fraud, the mound builders and ancient aliens. All of these things kind of mixed together with how archaeology really works and how archaeology can approach these questions about who built what and when. So that's Oxford University Press. And so, like I said, well, I'm providing some discount coupons for Ancient America and for Archaeological Oddities. Again, 30% off. You contact the contact information is on those the things I sent Chester. So you contact Rowman Littlefield, you give him the code, and you buy the book. There's going to be a shipping charge. I think they charge you like $5 to ship it, but it's a really nice discount for those books. And Ancient America has a hard copy, which is a little more expensive, and a soft copy, and both of them are in ebooks too. But you hardly save any money with the ebooks. So, listen, I encourage you to go out and buy multiple copies. They're great Christmas presents, or whatever you like. So that's my the end of my shamelessly promoting my books.
Wonderful, and I'm definitely going to take you up on those. We have two quick news stories to get to as well, and the first one is our very own board member Joseph Woody Aguilar just gave a virtual lecture through the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. This was a really interesting one because he focused on sort of the chain of custody of Native American artifacts, as well as rights to indigenous intellectual property. And that's something that we don't, I think as archaeologists, we do tend to understand that concept, but I don't think it's something that really gets communicated more broadly to the public. That when we're working with, for example, Ken, you brought up many examples of the Native American interpretations and perspectives, and often we get these from the ethnographic record. Well, the things that people said to the ethnographers, to the anthropologists, often today could be seen as indigenous intellectual property. And he calls for institutions to have sort of situational awareness about intellectual property, heritage, and the sensitivity of material culture. And so, yeah, I was wondering if you had any comments on this one before we move to the next story.
Yes, I do, actually, because in a number of cases that I've personally experienced, I see archaeological sites in which interpretations have been imposed from the outside, where if these folks took any time at all, they could look at, in some cases, published by the people themselves of this is what this means, and then citing that and giving them credit because they're the folks who know this stuff. I think that generally speaking, anthropologists, archaeologists, scientists are good at least at citing people, at least saying, listen, we think these are spirit beings because the people whose ancestors made these things tell us these are spirit beings. And then giving credit where credit is due is an important part of science and history. We're not inventing this stuff. These are things that other people have told us, and they deserve the credit for that. So yeah, absolutely. It becomes even more dicey when we're talking about genetics, in which biological anthropologists have collected genetic material, have collected biological material from native people for genetic research that never goes back to those native people, but is used for other purposes. And that's a real problem, and that's something that a lot of biological anthropologists are dealing with today.
Yeah, and we've even covered on this stream some instances of my coffee mug just got on the shot there. We've covered some instances of biological anthropologists, like a certain one affiliated with the University of California system, who was very active on social media, and how some of these folks might not be living up to what we would consider the ethical standards of today, while others are trying to lead by example, and it's unfortunate that we have, especially when it comes to biological anthropology, the folks who are still committing transgressions are unfortunately more visible than those who are being better examples.
Hey, Chester, if I can, this is an apocryphal story. I don't really know if it's true. When I was in grad school, I heard the story of a consortium of Native American scholars who wrote an NSF grant proposal for the exhumation of burials in Plymouth Plantation. Plymouth Plantation or Boston, or early Boston. So in other words, it was actually a very well-researched, well-reasoned proposal to study paleopathology among the first white settlers of New England. And they were turned down because what they were suggesting was illegal. It was not legal to dig up the remains of these people. And so it was illegal. And of course, that was the point. So how come that's illegal when you guys dig up our ancestors all the time to research things like paleopathology? So it's an interesting story, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but it makes you think about, why are the rules different for one group of people than they are for another group of people?
Absolutely a troubling double standard. And then there was one more point on Woody's talk, which I think actually transitions well into our second news story, because Woody's been working with a number of museums and other institutions, and in some cases advocates for institutions that, they fill the role of a museum in communicating the past and being stewards of the physical cultural heritage, are not necessarily museums in the traditional sense. And that's what we seem to have here with the I'm gonna say this wrong, Wanaskewin, which is a cultural center. Well, the Wanaskewin Heritage Site, which is outside of Saskatoon in Saskatchewan, in the Canadian, I guess you could call it High Plains. And what's interesting about this story, we've had some folks involved with our project who have been talking about this a fair bit in the last week or two, is that, okay, so here's the Heritage Center. So this is sort of a visitor center at this, it's actually a heritage park. I think I said Heritage Center, but it's a heritage park. And what's interesting is that just 2 years ago, in 2019, they reintroduced bison herds, which had been absent since the notorious issues of settler colonial populations intentionally killing off the bison populations. So they just reintroduced this herd, barely 2 years ago, and this year, due to activity from these bison, see, there's the bison right there. They have actually uncovered some petroglyphs, and they're not like the petroglyphs that we see here at Mesa Prieta. Instead, we have these incised stones, like I'm showing a picture right here. And funnily enough, or interestingly enough, and this ties again back into Dr. Aguilar's talk, is that the CEO of Wanaskewin Heritage Park happens to be Cree Native American. And so the Native American groups who call this area ancestral were immediately able to identify these designs as bison and depictions of a bison rib cage and spine, which is the sort of interpretation that we really can't get to if we don't engage with these indigenous populations. So very much like you're advocating for giving that indigenous voice there, this is a perfect example of having a better interpretation and a better understanding because of that. And that Cree CEO even went so far as to say this was a gift from the bison. It's almost fitting that it depicts a part of the bison and was also brought to the surface by bison.
It's very cool.
So, is there anything else that you would like to say before we sign off here?
No, I think again, here's what I do want to say. First, thank you for anybody who stuck with us the whole time. I hope you enjoyed it. But primarily, what I'd like to do is, Chester, do me a huge favor and convey my enormous gratitude and respect to Catherine Wells. this is like I'm being absolutely sincere here. When I discovered Mesa Prieta a few years ago and bought her book and read her book, I was just absolutely stunned with what important, vital work she's done. The book's lovely, it's wonderful, and I really, really hope that maybe this spring we'll be out there and we can check it out. But that's, kudos and just great, great respect for Catherine Wells, because this is God's work she's done here.
And the book that Ken is talking about is Life on the Rocks. Thank you. This is also available on our website, on our store. So
it's a great read. It's a page turner, absolutely.
Oh yeah, I mean her whole fight to get protections for the Mesa is quite a thrilling saga. I also have a copy, so encourage you all to get that, in addition to, of course, Ken's books. And
absolutely.
And don't forget to use the discount code. I popped that down in the chat there. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. We do have a couple of quick comments. So Debbie Flowers from Ohio says, "We love the Newark earthworks. We'll have to check out some more of these sites. Thank you for an entertaining, informative talk."
Oh, thank you very much. You guys see Serpent Mound, Serpent Mound, Serpent Mound.
Yeah. In fact, so for the audience, Debbie is my mom, and she's actually taken me to Serpent Mound.
She's a plant. She's a plant. All right.
Yeah. Very much a reason why I'm in archaeology, was getting to see that as a kid. And then Martin Brody says, Professor Feddo, Joan Vestokis, I might be saying that wrong, used the ethnographic record of Algonquin birch bark scrolls to make and interpret anthropomorphs wearing cone-shaped hats as shamans. So
very interesting. Yep.
And we've Martin and I have actually corresponded about cone-shaped hats. We have some cone-shaped hats and images here at Mesa Prieta. For the Tewa, the cone-shaped hat was a sign of a warrior. So the ones that we have here are most likely warriors. So I think that gets us through the comments. I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you again for sharing your perspectives. And I also have to say, you're a very animated speaker. I kind of added your bubble back in during your slideshow because you tend to talk with your hands, which makes you very entertaining to both watch and listen to.
It's hard not to.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Tune in next month in January. Our guest will be Judith Habik-Mosh, who will be talking about the mysterious lost technology of lead-glazed pottery. So there we go. We'll continue with the mysteries theme with lost technologies. In the meantime, thank you all for tuning in. Have a good one.